this is a class to hopefully give everybody some pointers on how to take better pictures. So a couple of things. So taking pictures is part of the American culture. Everybody takes pictures. I can't tell you the number of times I've been at some place and a construction worker or even a physician will say, "Oh wow, that would be great. I would love to have your job. All you do is take pictures all day." Well, I do love my job, but it can be a little bit more complicated than most people think. And so everybody just assumes that since they like taking pictures, that their pictures are great. And with the advent of smartphones, it's even more prevalent. There's more people taking more pictures, and now everybody's posting their pictures on social media. And so smartphone cameras are getting more and more advanced, and the apps used to take and edit the photos are becoming more intuitive. This makes things easier, but it also can make things more complicated. Taking great pictures has always been and always will be more about the person taking the picture than the camera. Now, having said that, so photography is an art form, and it's very subjective. An example is, at one point I was a judge in a national photo contest for 2 or 3 years, and I remember I was the only photographer that was a judge, and so they put me in charge of the photo entries, and everybody else, they were, word people, editors. And I remember arguing with this group for about 30 minutes because there were these 2 pictures, and one was a baseball play at second base with the second baseman leaping into the air, catching the ball, and a guy sliding under him. And the other one was just a picture of a boxing match and a guy getting hit and, spittle and sweat slinging off. Well, in my opinion, the picture of the baseball player was a much better picture. Compositionally, the background was beautiful. It was, just 2 lines because of the wall in the background with a yellow line going down the middle of it. And just compositionally, color, everything, it made a better picture. Well, I'm not kidding, about 30 minutes, the editors were arguing with me, well, we just like this one better. I'm like, but look, this one's composed better. The timing is better. It was harder to get this picture. It was harder to compose this picture. Yeah, but we just like this one better. So photography is very subjective. So what I think is a good picture, you may not agree with, and vice versa. So keep that in mind. If you like a picture, shoot it. Just also shoot a more traditional one. Because at the end of the day, we're probably going to pick the best picture and run that one. So some basic tips that a lot of people don't think about. Cell phones are typically in your pocket, and there's a little lens on there, and that gets dirty. And a lot of people don't even think about that. They get their camera out, and they think something's wrong with their phone. But all it is just the lens has gotten smudged. So if you're going to be taking pictures for anything, just take a couple of minutes, and I'm not expecting everybody to walk around with a microfiber cloth in their pocket, but it'd be cool if you did. Or maybe we could, with the phones that we're going to be using, put them in a pouch, and when you check them out, there's a microfiber cloth in there. So just clean it off. Just clean the lens off real quick. In a pinch, your shirt will work, but you got to keep in mind that a lot of times if your shirt's made out of synthetic fiber, it may scratch the lens. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so I did want to tell a brief story about photography as an art form. Everybody remember the Oklahoma City bombing? Does everybody remember the famous picture of the fireman carrying the child from the bombing? What a lot of people don't realize is that was a major cropped photo. The photographer who shot that was actually a bank teller and worked across the street and just happened to have his camera in his car when it happened. And so right after, he went and grabbed his camera because he liked taking pictures. And he went and grabbed his camera and shot that picture, and an AP editor actually cropped it the way it was. He was way far back, and it was much more than the fireman from head to toe. I mean, it was a super crop of an image. And so just keep in mind that, and that won a Pulitzer. That guy wasn't even a professional photographer. I met him several years after that event, and he had become a professional photographer because of that one picture. But he won a Pulitzer Prize for that picture. So timing is everything. Being in the right place at the right time when moments happen is much more important sometimes, especially with photojournalism. So lighting and composition are two of the main things you want to consider. So lighting is the most important part of photography. Photography actually means painting with light. I would recommend that you try to use available light whenever possible and avoid using the flash. Now that may be counterintuitive to some people, but smartphones, using available light, your smartphone is very intuitive, and they're getting better and better. In fact, when I was taking pictures to give some examples, I was having a really hard time of taking a bad picture because there were some certain things that I thought the smartphone would have a hard time with, like putting someone up against a bright background and then they're in the shadows, and actually the phone kind of did a really good job of that, and you'll see in a minute. So the smartphones have gotten really good at adjusting to those kind of things. So start out by just taking an available light picture, because the smartphones have gotten really good at shooting in low light situations, and a lot of times when you use the flash, you have glowing eyes or the skin is really, really blown out. A lot of people don't realize that the software that your phone uses to take pictures, it's just trying to get a balanced overall exposure. So it's going to, like, the background may be really, really bright white and the foreground may be really, really dark. Well, it doesn't know what is supposed to be the main part of your subject, so it's just going to balance all of that out. And so if your background's really, really dark and the person in your foreground is really, really bright, like if you're using a flash, then they're going to be really, really super bright and probably go white, and the background is going to be more balanced. So this is an example. So the one on the left was shot with the on-camera flash on the phone, and plus the flash on the phone, it's just a little LED bulb. And like, whereas the flash that I use, it can go farther and be spread out more, whereas that little LED light, it's only little bitty. And so the one on the left, you see she's got the red eyes and her skin is white. The one on the right was actually shot without a flash at all, with just available light. So start out by using available light, and then if that doesn't work, then turn your flash on. As a general rule, it's always best to have your primary light source, either the sun, a light bulb, or an open window, behind you shining on your subject. So a lot of photography basically breaks down to the phrase, "it depends." My first photo instructor that I ever had when I was in high school used to say that. Well, what's the best way to take this photo? It depends. So it's typically best to have your primary light source shining on your subject and behind you, but not always. If you're outside, you don't necessarily want to put your subject with the sun directly in their faces, because that makes people squint. And so sometimes it works best if you can turn your subject so their back is to the camera and you're facing into the light, as long as the light from the sun or whatever isn't shining directly into the lens. I would rather have a picture that's a little underexposed but no one's squinting, versus their faces are really, really bright but everybody's going like this. So, and again, the flash on your phone camera sometimes can work better in daylight as a fill light. But again, not always. It's just a little LED light. So, and this is going to be a common theme running throughout this presentation, is take lots of pictures, experiment. Take a picture and look at it. And if it's not getting you what you want, take another one. Make little adjustments. That's one of the most important things about digital photography, in my opinion. I mean, when I first got into doing this, the only way to see what you were working with is if you had a Polaroid back to put on the back of the camera. And that was a lot of trouble because you set up a lighting situation and you'd put the Polaroid back on, you'd take a picture, you got to wait a couple of minutes. Then you got to, if it looked good, then you take the Polaroid back off, you put film in the camera, you put the regular back on, and then you could take photos. Well, nowadays, I mean, you can just take all the pictures you want. At a typical college football game, I would shoot thousands of images, literally, and they might run 5. So shoot as many pictures as you want. Shoot lots of pictures. As a photographer, people comment on how great a photographer I am, but at the end of the day, mainly, in all honesty, it's just because I shoot a lot more than the rest of you. I just shoot extra pictures. I once had an Associated Press photographer tell me, if an idea pops into your head, shoot it. Because you can always, and back then it was film, but he said, you could always just not print it, whereas if you don't shoot it, you don't know whether it would have been the shot or not. So if an idea pops into your head, shoot it. Just take the time to take more pictures. Depending on the time of day, this goes back to the previous slide, you can arrange your subjects with their backs to the sun to prevent squinting. This may not work if the sun, like late in the evening or early in the morning, because the sun may be shining directly into the lens. But if it's, like after 10 o'clock, this will typically work. As long as you don't see a bright spot of the sun in the camera, it should work. And then, is the subject backlit? Again, that goes back to what we were talking about, shooting with someone in front of a bright white window. You don't necessarily want to do that because your subject will be really, really dark. But again, it depends, because sometimes I would rather that picture than someone squinting. So this is an example of, and again, I was having a hard time getting the camera to take a bad picture because the one on the left actually doesn't look that bad to me. Of course, the one on the right is much better, and all I did was I just turned her around. And literally all I did was, we were in the exact same place. All I did was just turn her around so that I was farther away from that back window. So just experiment. So composition. So this is very subjective. I've always thought this was subjective. But there's some key points that are traditionally make for better pictures. So you always, in my opinion, want to make your subject the largest, most important part of a picture. If you're taking pictures of one person or a small group of 2 to 4 people, don't stand way, way back so you can see them from their head to their toes. Faces are the most important part of a picture. And if someone has done something to warrant you taking their picture, they're important. And so you want to be able to see their faces and recognize it. So this is an example. So you don't want to take pictures, like I said, from head to toe. Get up close and put your main subject all the way in the foreground. Same thing here, 2 people. You don't want to, because this is something that I see a lot of people do. They just get their phone out and they just take a picture and they're 10 feet away from their subject and the people end up being this big and you can't recognize anybody. Make use of negative space. Again, this is like a traditional photography composition. Negative or empty space refers to the areas around and between the subject of a picture. So the negative space would be the space on the left-hand side of the picture, whereas your subject is on the right. And then another thing, if you're up close to a person and they're on the right-hand side of the frame, you want to put them looking to the left because you don't want them looking off the page. And this just helps your subject to stand out. Having negative space, it's sort of when you look at a photo, your eye is drawn to more detail. It's just instinctual. You're going to look at their face, and then the negative space, it just helps your subject to stand out. Another composition rule is called the rule of thirds. It's a compositional style that's in painting and photography where the photo is sort of divided into 3 equal sections. And the subject is placed in one of the sections, typically off-center. This just makes the photographs more visually interesting, gives a greater sense of space and motion. And then actually most camera apps, on your phones, most of the camera apps will allow you to call up the grid so you can actually see the grid, and that might help you compose better pictures. And again, the rule of thirds is more of a guideline than a hard rule or law. It's just something to keep in mind. You know, there have been a number of times where I've actually shot pictures where I like the subject dead center. I just think it's cool. This is an example of the rule of thirds. You see how there's like a grid, and this will be what comes up on your camera. Where literally there'll be white lines, and so you can just arrange your subject to intersect with the lines. Most of the time it's good to see what's going on in the background of your photo to show context. However, please be aware of your surroundings, especially in regards to patients or in the background and patient information on whiteboards or forms or computer screens. Now, there's a lot of times that I've actually shot pictures where you can see that stuff and I can just make it go away in Photoshop. Shows like CSI have been really difficult to deal with sometimes, because if you have a picture and you see it on CSI, they'll run this software that will enhance an area. It doesn't really work that way. If the pixels aren't there, you can't enhance it. And so if words on a screen are blurred out, you just can't bring that back. There's really no way to. But just to be on the safe side, just know that if a picture comes across my desk, I kind of look for that kind of stuff, and if it's there by accident, I can make it go away, and we won't have to worry about it. But it would be better just to, from the get-go, don't do that. So don't just line people up shoulder to shoulder. If you're taking a group picture, if you've got like 4 or 5 people, don't have all of them standing here like this, you know, shoulder to shoulder. Just kind of arrange them to be more visually interesting. Try to arrange them at an angle. You know, if you're taking a portrait of somebody, tell them to turn to the left so they're more at an angle instead of looking at you dead center like that. And it's funny, I was talking to my wife this morning and we were talking. She had never heard of the rule of thirds, and she actually said, "I thought you were always supposed to put your subject in the exact middle." And that just never occurred to me, that some people may think that's what you're supposed to do. But even in smaller groups of pictures of 3 people, it's more visually interesting if they're arranged correctly. And so this is an example. So this was a picture that was submitted to us, and again, they're just all lined up. You know, they're from head to toe, and depending on how large this picture was run, you wouldn't be able to recognize any of them. And so, I mean, obviously, with a group that size, you have to kind of step back in order to see everybody. And so if they're all lined up that way, you can't really see everybody the way you want to. So arrange it so that some people are in front, some people are in back. And then a trick that I like to use is hold the camera up and kind of angle it down, because a lot of times that makes it easier to see people in the background. And so if you've got a group of large group of people and there's a shorter person in the back, if you hold it up like this and angle it down, you'll be able to see them better. So another thing that's important, in my opinion, is don't just take pictures, try and tell stories. You know, there's an old saying, picture's worth 1,000 words. Instead of just taking a picture holding an award or standing with someone accepting an award, take a few minutes and think, why are they getting the award? And then try to take pictures of them in their work environment. I mean, they're getting the award for something they did. And so it would complement the story when you give them the detail to know or to see them in their environment. You know, I once was at a photojournalism conference, and a person got up and said, you know, as far as newspapers go, the first thing a person sees when they look at a newspaper in the rack is the picture. If the picture catches their eye, they're going to read the caption. The caption will lead them to the story. The story will inevitably be jumped to the inside where they will see the ads. But it all starts with the picture. And so if you know, like in the water cooler, if you email out the water cooler and the picture catches somebody's attention, well, they're just going to be interested in reading the story. And so, you know, photography really complements writing in that way, as it draws people in. And so, you know, again, take a few minutes, shoot them in their work environment, take a few pictures of them doing their jobs. But again, please be mindful of what's in the background, and that's just for patient information. It's like when I used to work for the newspaper, I never had to think about that because that wasn't my responsibility. But now I have to be very aware of that. And so I'm not saying don't take the picture of them holding the award. Do both. Because if you just take pictures of them in their work environment, it may not work out the way you think it will, and we have to have some kind of picture. So do both. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not either or. It's both and. So again, there's a experiment with and make use of the different modes on your camera app. Most of the camera apps now, they have like portrait mode, which actually creates the effect of the background going blurry, and everybody they've always seemed, how do you do that? How do you make the background go blurry and your subject be sharp and focused? Well, I could spend 30 minutes explaining to you how that happens, but y'all don't need to know any of that. Just put on the portrait app, or click the portrait button on your phone app, and it'll do it for you. And then, and that works with, if you've got more than 2 or 3 people in the photo, it doesn't necessarily always work, because it's hard to have 2 people on the exact, because basically what it's doing, it's creating a false field of focus. And so whatever your main subject is going to be in focus, and then everything in the background is going to go blurry. And so if you've got 3 people and one of them is farther back, they're going to be blurry, versus the 2 people up front are going to be in focus. There's also something called an HDR mode, which stands for high dynamic range imaging. It's funny, when I was researching this, I've always known what HDR was, but I didn't know what the acronym stood for. I just knew what it did. And so basically what HDR mode does is it shoots one image underexposed, it shoots one image exposed properly, and then one image overexposed, and then it brings them all together. It just brings out if there's something that's deep dark in shadows, it lightens those. If your highlights are really blown out, like if someone, like a doctor's got a white coat on, it tones those down a little bit. And so I would recommend always leaving your camera in HDR mode. Mainly because if it comes to me and I'm going to edit it, it just gives me more to work with. You know, Photoshop is amazing, but if something is white in Photoshop, that means there are no pixels there. And if there's no pixels there, there's nothing I can do to bring that back. And it's the same way if you're shooting and you've got a real dark shadow, somebody's real dark in the background. If it's dark black, there's nothing I can do to bring those pixels out. Those pixels just don't exist. The main thing I would recommend is just getting the phone out and go to your photo app and just look at all the different settings and experiment with them. Most camera apps now, they have facial recognition software, so that as soon as you get your phone out and hold it up like this, it starts looking for faces, and it's going to focus on those faces. If you want to move your area of focus to a different part of the frame, you just kind of touch that area. So if I was taking a picture of this area here, and I wanted Cassandra to be in focus, I would just touch Cassandra's face and it would focus on that, and then everybody else would kind of go blurry a little bit. So just touch the different areas of the screen to focus. If you want something to be in focus, touch that and it'll be in focus. And all that just helps you avoid blurry photos. You can adjust the exposure on in camera. So if you're taking a picture and you're up against a bright white window and your subject looks very dark, typically the way it works is if you just touch the screen and then move your finger back and forth, it will raise and lower the exposure. And so if you're taking a picture with your phone and you see your subject is real dark, just lighten it up. The background may go bright white, but again, the most important thing that we're trying to see is the person's face. And then it's better not to zoom in, because if you're not really zooming in, your phone doesn't have any extra glass in it. It's a digital zoom, and if you pinch an area and try to make it big, it's just cropping it, and I can do that in Photoshop later if we want that. So, if you're taking a picture of a group of people or one person, instead of composing your picture by zooming in on them, take 3 or 4 steps closer to them. That works better rather than trying to zoom in on your phone, because it just makes things look pixelated and it all starts to fall apart. It's sometimes important to steady the phone. Years ago, Mike Kittrell taught me a trick that if I'm in a low light situation and I didn't want to use a flash, I could actually lean up against a wall and take a deep breath and hold it, and that steadies the camera. You don't get such camera shake. Another trick was if you lean up against a wall, take a deep breath and hold it, and shoot more than one picture. I don't understand the physics behind it, but the first picture will have camera shake. The second and the third one will be sharp. I don't know why, it just always worked. I actually shot stuff at 1/4 of a second before, leaned up against a building like this, taking a deep breath and shooting 4 or 5 frames. And the first 2 would be really blurry because the camera's shaking. That's like with a heavy 7200 millimeter lens. Well, the third and the fourth one would be tack sharp. And so it's the same thing with your phone. If you're in a real low light situation, you don't want to use the flash, just lean up against something and or put your hand up against a wall and steady it. That way you won't have camera shake. So a lot of times people don't realize if they take a picture and it looks blurry, the reason it's blurry is because your hands are shaking. You don't really perceive it, but the camera does. So I wasn't real excited about sharing this information because I don't really want people doing this. Because again, what I think is a good picture, if you get your hands on it, you trying to make it better. The first time I ever did anything in Photoshop, this would have been 1992. The paper I worked with at the Mississippi Press, I had never seen anything like this before. And so I got in and I edited a picture in Photoshop, and it ran in the paper the next day, and it was awful. It looked great on the screen, and I actually got fussed at by the editor. He's like, "Don't ever do that again. Just leave it alone. They can fix it in the back if they need to." But I had made the sky like this really crazy looking blue, and the grass was this crazy looking yellowish green. And it looked great on the screen, but by the time it gets into the paper, it was all messed up. So again, the photo apps, and even some there's apps like the Microsoft Photo. You can do some editing in those. Now look, if it looks really bad and you want to play with it, that's fine. Just save it as a different file name so you still have the original. If you're going to edit photos, it's always best to keep the original, because if you send me a picture, I may reply back, "Can you send me the original file?" Generally, the phone does a pretty good job. If you want to try your hand at editing, go ahead. It takes practice. The most important thing to remember is you could ruin the picture. So take it easy. again, this goes back to something I said earlier, take a test photo and look at it. If you don't like what you're getting, make subtle changes. I do that all the time. Again, one of the greatest things about digital photography has been the ability to see what I've got. You know, when I'm working with multiple light situations where I'm controlling the light, I can't tell you the number of times that I shoot a picture and I have the light the way I think it should be. Well, when I look at the picture, there's this really funny shadow, and if any of you have been on a shoot with me, you'll hear me sometimes say, where is that coming from? And it's because there's a shadow in the background that I don't want there, and I'm trying to figure out, you know, where it's coming from. So you move a light. So take a picture and look at it. If it's not what you want, take another picture. If that's not what you want, take another picture. Take lots and lots of pictures. If there's one thing you get out of this, shoot lots of pictures. Most of the phones now have what's called burst mode. So as long as you're holding the button, it'll take 15 pictures in a matter of seconds. And then you want to look, and so if one of the things you want to keep in mind is if you take a picture of a group of people, look and make sure everybody's eyes are open. You know, I can't tell you the number of times that people send me a picture and two people's eyes are closed. Well, do you have any more? Well, no, I only took one. Well, now you've got two people in the picture, and it's important because we have to use it because we really need an example of that event, but now you got people's eyes that are closed. And then look for funny facial expressions. If you're taking pictures of someone and they're talking to you, which I would prefer a picture of someone talking and interacting versus just standing there looking into the camera. And that's why it's really good to shoot lots and lots of pictures, because everybody's like that. Everybody, when you're talking, your mouth gets in funny shapes and stuff. And so a lot of times if I'm shooting pictures of people at a podium, I'll wait until they pause. And they're still at the podium. You still get the feel that they're speaking to a group, but they're not actually saying anything, so their mouth is closed. Oh, and that's it.